And the idea that modern art is something vulgar, something crazy, and so on, and it's not about these big values, you know, the religious guy and all that stuff, okay? Stuff. The word stuff is in the collage. So, you know, it's about stuffs, you know, two kind of stuffs, you know, I mean, the great stuff and the high stuff and the low stuff, but it's also about the hallucination and the everyday. You see, it's putting the hallucination in the everyday, into the everyday. The hallucination is not anymore the supernatural naturalism, you know, this high stance. It is just in the everyday as hallucination. But, in the idea of natural supernaturalism by Carlyle, you had already an anticipation, a preview, if you want, of this idea. Because that's also what the idea of Carlyle is about. He's saying natural supernaturalism. Huh? So you see the dialectic, it is a very specific dialectic of collage. Collage is, at the end, the only great invention of modern art. I mean, no, excuse me, of 20th century art. It is a major invention in 20th century art. And it's not only la révolution des papiers collés, the revolution of papier collé. Because it went through other things. It went through Maxence, it went through Schwitters, and in both cases, the narrative content is more, and even the kind of dramatic content. Even the kind of drama. So then the connection with painting is quite obvious, as I tried to show with Richard Hamilton, making his tableau as collage. And using this play of images inside the floating structure of the plan or framed as a tableau. And playing with the images inside the view, inside this second view, which becomes a tableau. So the connection, I think, is quite clear. I hope so.
Another question? Thanks. Question right here, third row, I think. Good. Thanks.
It's not so much a direct question, but it's with respect to Mick's opening remarks about the difference in context he mentioned and language between the French European and the Anglo-Saxon context. And with that in mind, I just wanted to address to you both, but perhaps to Michael first, what you thought of all of this in relation to, for example, someone like Leo Steinberg's idea of the flatbed picture plane in the late 60s, and what bearing that has on some of your thoughts, because I feel like this does impinge on some of the things you're saying as well.
Me, a Steinberg flatbed picture plane. I just never was very interested in that notion.
Why not?
It always seemed to me forced. I mean, I still saw the picture as vertical. So
he says that too, though, doesn't he? He says that it's still.
It just never gripped me. It never gripped me.
I was hoping you'd be more argumentative with him about that then.
I mean, in the same way that I never for a second could buy, say, Rosalind Krauss's idea of the palettes being like fundamentally horizontal. You know, it just didn't, that they were made horizontally didn't seem to me to bear fundamentally on what you saw when you stood in front of them. So, I mean, I don't mean to just knock the Steinberg, but it was not something I ever found myself motivated to think very hard about.
Okay.
I mean, I know that it's an immensely popular notion, and so.
No, just say. Well, with a little difference. There's a little difference, which is that the first time I saw The Bed by Rauschenberg, because his argument is grounded on this very specific painting, I was very amazed, I must say. And I thought it was really a great painting, very strange. It was so strange to see a bed on a wall. and painted. A painted bed on the wall. For sure, there is still there a strong experience. So, so if you relate the text of Steinberg to that experience, then the text is still interesting, I think. But you know, I'm a very empirist, empiristic. I'm more empiristic than most British people. It's a provocation, excuse. Little provocation.
I wanted to follow up and perhaps return to this question of the picture and the picture plane, but think about it actually, well, very much beyond the picture plane, into the theatrical and the tableau that Jean-Francois Chevrier mentioned. And I was wondering about that in relation, Michael Fried, to art and objecthood and your comments on theatricality and how you feel about these sets of concerns in relation to more recent work on the tableau.
On more recent work on the...
On the tableau.
On Sublime?
No. Tableau.
Oh, tableau. I actually don't quite understand. What, the more recent work, do you mean photographic work? Or
Yes, I mean...
you mean like Jeff Wall?
Say like Jeff Wall, exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the kind of thing I tried to lay out in that book. Yes, I mean, I was trying... Art and Objecthood was written out of a sense that, of course, in part out of my commitment to a certain group of artists and what they were doing, right? Caro, Lewis, Pollock, Noland, the dreaded Olitsky, right, who's still far from being appreciated as a great painter. It's supposed to be Greenberg's folly. But as Greenberg used to say, the truth will out. And what seemed to me sort of something interesting, something was going on, and that would be Tony Smith and Judd and Morris and Andre. And I felt these things were fundamentally different, and I felt extremely drawn to one body of work. I felt the challenge and the provocation of the other body of work, and something went on. They were brilliant constructors of small shows in the white space of the gallery, but I felt it was the enemy, right? And I felt that ultimately there was an attitude towards, a position, a stance towards art that was wrong and disastrous. So I wrote Art and Objecthood in the extreme, immoderate terms, which I still deeply believe in, to argue that. But the whole point about that was an attempt to characterize a particular moment. Right? Even as a critic, I feel I'm operating always historically. The word that's almost never remembered when someone quotes anything from that article is theater is now the enemy of art. Right? It wasn't 100 years before the enemy of art. It wasn't, though for Diderot it turns out to have been. It certainly wasn't for Shakespeare or Racine or Caravaggio or Rubens or Delacroix. Now, when I started to come to terms, late, much later than Jean-Francois, with what was happening interestingly in photography, I found myself very drawn to Wall and others. You might say in spite of, but also, well, really, better to put it in French, à travers the constructedness of it, right? And I found myself wanting to make distinctions within the body of photography. So, for example, Jeffrey Crutzen would seem to me a photographer who is theatrical in the worst sense of the word. A contemporary artist like Bill Viola takes theatricality, in my sense, to a level of appallingness that, you know, is just like something new under the sun. The passions is just, you know, extraordinary in that way. But Wall, by and large, I found gripped by. And again, like Jean-Francois, I think this is what Jean-Francois must have meant, and this is, I will repeat it. I mean, when you say you're an empirical critic, and this would also be one's Greenbergianism in this sense, you have to go off of your experience. You trust your experience. You reason, all the reasoning, all the thinking, all the constructing that goes on is generated by your attempt to account for experiences and intuitions that you have in front of the work of art. So I found myself gripped by Wall, persuaded by Wall, wanting to see more Wall, wanting to stay a long time in front of his pictures. Therefore, the construction, whatever was going on, was okay, right? And then the project of thinking and theorizing and writing criticism was to try to understand why it was okay, how it functioned, and that would be the project of that book, in which a concept that I'm calling to-be-seenness functions in a way. There's something called to-be-seen. So you might want to, I mean, I wouldn't want to put it this way exactly, but I'll put it this way just heuristically, a sort of good theatricality versus bad theatricality, just the way in which that book, I'm finally going to say, the Beckers come up with something like good objecthood versus bad objecthood. And this is just, I mean, everything that one does discursively is just a kind of ultimately heuristic procedure to make good on the nature of one's experiences and intuitions. That's the empiricism that we would share. So that, I mean, and then it turns out that, whereas one might have thought a priori, whoa, what could be, I mean, and if you look at earlier photography, like the Peach Robinson, or the kind of photographs, attempted genre photographs that Disdery talks about in L'Art de la Photographie in 1860, where you might have thought it would be bound to be a disaster. Turns out it's not. Turns out it's anything but. This is why we look at art and why we want to do what we do. It's precisely to be extended, to be surprised, to be taken somewhere in one's experience and thinking that you had absolutely no idea beforehand, right? And I find that thrilling.